The letter wasn't meant for me. I found it wedged between our water bill and a grocery store circular, its envelope the color of old cream, handwritten in blue ink that bled slightly at the curves. The return address listed only initials, OT, and a P.O. box number in the industrial district across town. My wife's name was spelled wrong. Brooke Cooper instead of Brooke. An easy mistake, but one that caught my eye. After 17 years working for the United States Postal Service, the last 8 as a sorting supervisor at the Fresno Distribution Center, I developed what my colleagues called mail sense. That instinct that told you when something was off. When an envelope had been opened and resealed. When a forwarding request didn't quite add up. When a love letter to your wife arrived with someone else's handwriting. I stood in our driveway for a full minute, the California sun beating down on my neck, turning that envelope over in my hands. I should have brought it inside. Should have set it on the kitchen counter for Brooke to find. Should have pretended I never saw it. Instead, I opened it. My dearest B. Last night was perfect. I keep thinking about the way you looked at me in room 214, the way you said my name when I stopped reading. My hands were shaking. Not from anger, that would come later, but from the strange sensation of reality shifting beneath my feet. 17 years of marriage, 2 kids in college, a mortgage we'd finally gotten under control, and here was proof, in blue ink, that my wife had been with another man. Can't wait until Thursday, same time. I'll bring the test from the pharmacy like you asked. Don't worry about N finding out. He suspects nothing. N. Nathan. Had to be Nathan Reed, the mail carrier who'd been running Route 47 for the past 2 years. The one Brooke always seemed to be coordinating schedules with. The one she'd mentioned having coffee with to discuss route optimization. I read the letter 3 more times before I noticed what my postal training should have caught immediately. The P.O. box number in the return address didn't exist. I'd processed thousands of pieces of mail bound for the industrial district. I knew every box number in that facility, and 847 wasn't one of them. The numbering system in that building ended at 799. Someone had created a fake return address, and in my line of work, that was a federal offense. I folded the letter back into its envelope, slipped it into my jacket pocket, and walked inside to find my wife. Brooke was in the kitchen, her back to me, scrolling through something on her phone. She'd changed since she got home from work. Yoga pants, that oversized Fresno State sweatshirt I'd given her 10 years ago. She looked comfortable. Normal. Like a woman who hadn't spent the previous night in room 214 of whatever motel she and Nathan had chosen. Hey, babe. She didn't turn around. I was thinking Chinese for dinner. Unless you want to do that new Thai place on Who's OT? The silence lasted 3 seconds. In those 3 seconds, I watched my wife's shoulders tighten, watched her thumb stop moving on her phone screen, watched her take a breath that was just a little too controlled. What? She turned around, her face arranged in careful confusion. OT? I don't know anyone with those initials. Why? I pulled the envelope from my jacket and set it on the counter between us. This came in the mail today. It's addressed to you. She didn't move toward it. That's when I knew everything in that letter was true. Travis, I have no idea what that is. You haven't even looked at it. I don't need to. It's probably junk mail or someone got the wrong address. It references room 214. It mentions a pregnancy test. And it says, N suspects nothing. I kept my voice level, but something cold was spreading through my chest. You want to tell me what's going on, or should I just call Nathan Reed directly? The color drained from her face. Travis, don't. I held up my hand. Don't lie to me. Not now. I've been sorting mail since before we met, Brooke. I can spot a forgery from across the room. I can tell when someone's trying to hide something. And right now, you're the worst liar I've ever seen. It's not what you think. Really? Because what I think is that you've been sleeping with a mail carrier behind my back for months. What I think is that the route optimization meetings and the coffee runs and the late nights at the office were all lies. What I think is that I've been coming home to a woman who's been playing me for a fool while she's out getting cozy with some guy who delivers packages for a living. He's not just some... She caught herself, but it was too late. The admission hung in the air between us. Not just some what, Brooke? Not just some affair? Not just some mistake? I slammed my palm on the counter, harder than I intended. We have 17 years together. We have kids in college, a mortgage, a life, and you threw it all away for what? For hotel rooms and secret letters? She sat down heavily at the kitchen table, her phone clattering against the wood. You don't understand. Then make me understand. Right now. Because I'm about 30 seconds away from walking out that door and never coming back? It wasn't supposed to happen this way. Her voice was barely audible. Nathan and I, It started as friendship. He was going through a divorce and I was feeling invisible here and... Invisible? You felt invisible? I laughed, but there was no humor in it. I've been working 60-hour weeks to keep this family afloat. I've been covering extra shifts so we could pay for Sarah's tuition and Michael's car. And while I was doing that, you were feeling invisible? That's not fair. None of this is fair, Brooke. Fair would have been you telling me you were unhappy. Fair would have been marriage counseling or an honest conversation or anything other than sneaking around with another man. I pulled out a chair and sat across from her, suddenly exhausted. How long? For a long moment, she just stared at her hands. Then she said, It started 6 months ago. 6 months. Half a year of lies. 180 days of coming home to me while carrying Nathan Reed's smell on her skin. I wasn't planning it, she continued, her voice barely above a whisper. Nathan and I were just talking about route schedules, and then we started having lunch together, and then... I don't need the romance novel version, Brooke. I need to know what you told him. She looked up, confused. Told him? About the routes, about the delivery schedules, about which houses on Route 47 have elderly residents who receive their Social Security checks on the 1st and 3rd of every month. Now it was her turn to look like reality had shifted. How did you... Because I'm good at my job. I pulled out a chair and sat across from her, the kitchen table suddenly feeling like an interrogation room. I noticed discrepancies 3 weeks ago, forwarding requests that didn't match our records, change of address forms filed for people who'd lived in the same house for 40 years, and every single one of them was on Nathan's route. Brooke's hands were trembling. He said it was just to help his numbers. He said the supervisors were threatening to cut his route, and if he could show more forwarding activity, he was stealing from them, Brooke. He was redirecting their benefit checks to fake addresses and cashing them before anyone noticed. I leaned forward. How much did you tell him? I didn't know. How much? She started crying. Not the dramatic sobs of someone caught in a lie, but the quiet, shaking tears of someone who just realized the full weight of what they'd done. He asked me for delivery windows. Which seniors lived alone? Who got the biggest checks? She wiped her face with the back of her hand. He said he was trying to help them. Said he was setting up a community assistance program and needed to know who needed it most. And you believed him. I wanted to believe him. She stood up suddenly, her chair scraping against the floor. I wanted to believe that the man I was, that Nathan was a good person who cared about people. Because if he wasn't, then what did that make me? I let that question hang in the air. We both knew the answer. How long has the mail theft been going on? I don't know. A few months, maybe. Travis, I swear I didn't know what he was doing with the information. You thought you were just having an affair, that it was just adultery, just the betrayal of your husband and your family in 17 years of marriage. I stood up, and for the first time, I let the anger show. Instead, you've been helping him steal from people who can barely afford their medication. People who worked their whole lives and now depend on those checks to survive. I'm sorry. I don't want your apology, Brooke. I want names. I want dates. I want every piece of information you gave Nathan Reed, and I want it written down before I call the Postal Inspection Service. Her eyes went wide. You're going to turn him in? I'm going to turn both of you in if you don't start cooperating right now. The next 48 hours were the longest of my life. Brooke gave me everything. Every schedule she'd shared, every conversation she could remember, every time Nathan had casually asked about this resident or that delivery window. She filled 3 pages of a legal pad with her handwriting, and by the time she was done, my hand was cramping from making notes of my own. The scope of what Nathan had done was staggering. Based on Brooke's information alone, he'd been targeting elderly residents on at least 3 different routes, not just his own, but 2 others he'd covered during vacation relief. He'd filed fraudulent change of address forms, redirecting benefit checks to a network of P.O. boxes he'd opened under fake names. He'd forged signatures on certified mail receipts. He'd been stealing from the most vulnerable people in our community, and my wife had handed him the map to do it. I didn't sleep that first night. Instead, I sat in my home office with my laptop, pulling records from the postal database, cross-referencing delivery confirmations with forwarding requests, building a timeline of Nathan's theft. By dawn, I had identified 47 potential victims and an estimated theft total of $89,000. $89,000 stolen from senior citizens. People like Mrs. Nakamura on Elm Street, who'd been complaining for months about her disability check arriving late. People like Mr. and Mrs. Fontaine on Oak Avenue, who'd told their mail carrier, told Nathan directly, that they couldn't afford their blood pressure medication because their Social Security payment never showed up. I pulled up the Fontaine's address and found 6 separate forwarding requests filed over the past 4 months, none of which matched any correspondence we had on record. Someone had been systematically redirecting their mail to a P.O. box in the industrial district. The same P.O. box listed on the envelope that had started all of this. At around 4 a.m., Brooke appeared in the doorway of my office. She looked like she hadn't slept either. Eyes red, hair tangled, still wearing the sweatshirt I'd seen her in hours earlier. "You're still up," she said quietly. "I'm still working." She hesitated, then stepped into the room. "Travis, I need you to understand something. When Nathan asked me for that information, he made it sound so reasonable. He said the elderly residents were having trouble with their delivery times, and he wanted to make sure their important mail arrived when they were home to receive it. And you believed that? I wanted to believe it. I wanted to believe that the man I was—" She stopped, swallowed. "I wanted to believe he was a good person." I turned away from my laptop to face her. "Brooke, these people are suffering. Mrs. Nakamura has diabetes. She needs that disability check to buy insulin. Without it, she could go into a coma. She could die." I let that sink in. "And you helped the man who's been stealing from her." "I didn't know. That's the part that scares me the most. You didn't know because you didn't want to know. You were so caught up in your affair that you never stopped to ask why Nathan needed information about when elderly people were home alone." She started crying again. "I'm so sorry, Travis. I'm so incredibly sorry. Sorry doesn't give Mrs. Nakamura her insulin money back. Sorry doesn't pay the Fontaine's rent." I turned back to my laptop. "I need you to write down everything. Every conversation you had with Nathan about routes and schedules. Every piece of information you gave him. Every detail you can remember, no matter how small. And then what? And then I figure out how to fix this mess without destroying both our lives." I wanted to walk into the Fresno post office that morning and drag Nathan Reed out by his collar. I wanted to throw him against a sorting machine and make him explain why he thought it was acceptable to steal from people who'd spent 50 years working for this country. I wanted to hurt him in ways that had nothing to do with postal regulations. Instead, I drove to the office of Carlos Wright, Senior Postal Inspector for the Central Valley Division. Carlos was a decade older than me, with graying temples and the kind of tired eyes that came from spending 20 years investigating mail fraud. I'd worked with him twice before, once on a counterfeit stamp operation, once on a missing package investigation that turned out to be an inside job. He was thorough, methodical, and not particularly interested in office politics. "Travis," he looked up from his desk as I walked in. "You're here early. Something wrong?" I closed his office door and handed him the legal pad. "I think we have a problem on Route 47. He gestured to the chair across from him. "Sit. Talk to me." I sat. I talked. I walked him through everything. The letter, the confrontation with Brooke, the late-night database search, the 47 potential victims I'd identified. I told him about the fraudulent forwarding requests, the fake P.O. box numbers, the systematic targeting of elderly residents who lived alone. Carlos listened without interrupting, taking occasional notes on a yellow legal pad of his own. When I finished, he set down his pen and leaned back in his chair. "How long did it take you to put all this together?" "About 8 hours. 8 hours to identify a theft operation that's been running for 6 months. He shook his head slowly. "You should have been an inspector, Travis. I'm just a sorter who knows his routes." "You're more than that." Carlos picked up the legal pad I'd given him and flipped through it. "This is solid work. Thorough documentation, clear timeline. No speculation beyond what the evidence supports. The prosecutor's office is going to love this." "We're not at the prosecutor's office yet." "We will be. This is federal mail fraud, Travis. Multiple counts, multiple victims, ongoing criminal enterprise. We're talking serious prison time." He paused. "Which brings me to the uncomfortable question. My wife. Your wife." Carlos leaned forward, his expression sympathetic but firm. "She's a co-conspirator, Travis. Maybe not knowingly, maybe not willingly, but she provided material assistance to a federal crime. That makes her liable. She didn't know what Nathan was doing with the information. Can you prove that?" I thought about Brooke sitting at our kitchen table, tears streaming down her face, insisting she'd believed Nathan's lies about community assistance programs. I thought about 17 years of marriage, 2 kids, a life built together. I can prove she cooperated the moment she learned the truth. I can prove she's willing to testify against Nathan. I can prove she's remorseful and determined to help make this right. That might not be enough for the prosecutors. Then I'll make it enough. Carlos studied me for a long moment. Then he nodded. "I'm going to need to bring in the Elder Fraud Unit from Sacramento. This is too big for a local investigation." He paused. "You understand what this means for your career, right? If your wife is charged, your position at the sorting center becomes untenable." "I know. And you're doing this anyway." "Those are real people, Carlos. Real seniors who can't pay their rent because some piece of garbage in a postal uniform decided their benefit checks belong to him. My career isn't worth more than their lives." He nodded again, and this time there was something like respect in his eyes. "All right, Travis, let's nail this son of a gun to the wall." The investigation moved faster than I expected. Within a week, Carlos had assembled a team of 4 inspectors, coordinated with the Social Security Administration's fraud division, and begun the painstaking process of documenting every stolen check, every forged signature, every fraudulent forwarding request. I couldn't be officially involved, conflict of interest they called it, but Carlos kept me informed. He'd call late at night when his team had finished their daily briefings and walk me through what they'd found. "We traced the P.O. Box network," he told me on the 5th day. "Reed opened 14 different boxes under 6 different names, all of them with fake IDs he'd purchased online." 14 boxes? For what? Redundancy. If one got flagged, he'd just redirect to another. He had a rotating system. Each victim's mail would pass through at least 3 different boxes before ending up in his hands. Made it nearly impossible to trace. But you traced it. Barely. This guy knew what he was doing, Travis. He studied the postal system, learned its weaknesses, exploited them systematically. If you hadn't caught that letter, Carlos let the sentence hang. On the seventh night, the call came later than usual. I could hear the tension in Carlos's voice before he even said hello. "It's worse than we thought," he told me on the seventh night. Reed wasn't just redirecting checks to P.O. boxes. He was also stealing mail directly from residences. We found a storage unit in his name with over 200 pieces of undelivered mail. What kind of mail? Everything. Credit card offers, bank statements, medical records, anything he could use for identity theft. Carlos paused. We also found a notebook with detailed notes on resident schedules, when they left for doctor's appointments, when their family members visited, when they were likely to be asleep. That information came from Brooke. Some of it. But Reed was also doing his own reconnaissance. He'd been stalking these people for months before he started stealing from them. I felt sick. Not just because of what Nathan had done, but because of what Brooke had enabled. She'd given a predator the tools to hunt more efficiently. What happens now? We're building a case for federal mail fraud, which carries up to 5 years per offense, plus elder abuse charges from the state, identity theft, forgery, and probably a few other things once the prosecutors get involved. Carlos's voice hardened. Reed is looking at a decade minimum, and that's if he cooperates. What about Brooke? Silence on the other end of the line. Then, the prosecutors want to talk to her. They're not looking to charge her as a co-conspirator. The evidence doesn't support that. But they need her testimony to make the case against Reed. She'll cooperate. She better, because right now, she's the best witness we have. The community meeting was Brooke's idea. 2 weeks after I'd found the letter, after the investigation had confirmed what we already knew, after the first round of subpoenas had been issued, she came to me with a suggestion. We were living in the same house but sleeping in different rooms, communicating in short, clipped sentences, navigating around each other like strangers forced to share space. "The seniors need to know what happened," she said. We were in the kitchen again. It seemed like all our important conversations happened in that room now. They need to understand why their checks went missing and what's being done about it. The Postal Service will send notifications. Notifications aren't enough. She sat down across from me, and for the first time since everything fell apart, she looked me directly in the eyes. These are real people who've been hurt. Mrs. Nakamura couldn't afford her insulin for 3 weeks. The Fontaines almost got evicted because they couldn't make rent. They deserve to hear from someone who can answer their questions. And you think that should be me? I think it should be us. Together. She took a breath. I can't undo what I did, Travis. I can't take back the information I gave Nathan, and I can't erase the damage it caused. But I can stand up in front of those people and take responsibility. And maybe, if I do that, some of them will be able to forgive me. I studied my wife's face, looking for signs of the woman I'd married. The woman who'd laughed at my terrible jokes and held my hand during my father's funeral and stayed up all night with me when our son had the flu. She was still in there somewhere, buried under layers of guilt and shame and regret. You'd be admitting to a federal crime in front of witnesses. I know. Carlos's team could use it against you. I know that too. She reached across the table, her fingers stopping just short of mine. I'm not asking you to forgive me, Travis. I'm asking you to let me try to make this right. I thought about it for a long moment. Then I pulled out my phone and started dialing. Who are you calling? The Senior Center on Madison Avenue. If we're going to do this, we're going to do it properly. The meeting was standing room only. 63 people crowded into the community room of the Madison Avenue Senior Center, their faces a mixture of anger, confusion, and fear. Some of them I recognized from my years of sorting their mail. Birthday cards from grandchildren, medical bills, the steady stream of correspondence that defined their daily lives. Others were strangers, but their expressions told the same story. They'd been violated, and they wanted answers. A woman in the front row clutched a folder of papers to her chest. Bank statements, probably. Or maybe copies of the checks that never arrived. An elderly man near the back sat with his arms crossed, his jaw set in the kind of hard line that suggested he'd been waiting weeks for this moment. A couple in matching sweaters held hands, their eyes red-rimmed, looking like they hadn't slept in days. I stood at the front of the room with Brooke on one side and Carlos on the other. A projection screen behind us displayed a timeline of Nathan's theft operation, though we'd blurred out names and addresses to protect the victim's privacy. "Thank you all for coming," I began, my voice carrying across the crowded space. "I know many of you have questions about what happened to your mail over the past 6 months. I'm going to try to answer as many of them as I can, but first, I need to explain how we got here." I walked them through the basics: the fraudulent forwarding requests, the stolen checks, the elaborate system Nathan had created to avoid detection. I explained how the investigation had been launched, what evidence had been collected, and what charges were being considered. "When will we get our money back?" the woman in the front row interrupted. "I've been waiting 3 months for my disability check." 3 months? Do you know what that's like?" "I understand your frustration, ma'am." "No, you don't. You can't possibly understand." She stood up, her folder of papers shaking in her hands. "I worked 37 years at Mercy Hospital. 37 years as a nurse, on my feet 12 hours a day, taking care of other people. And now I can't even pay my electric bill because some criminal decided my money belonged to him. The Social Security Administration is working to expedite replacement payments. Working to expedite. That's government talk for, we'll get to it when we get to it." She sat back down, her face flushed with anger. "I'm sorry. I know this isn't your fault. But I'm so tired of waiting for people to do something." "That's why we're here tonight," I said. "Because doing something starts with telling you the truth about what happened and who's responsible." I turned to Brooke. "My wife has something she needs to say." The room went quiet. Brooke stepped forward, her hands clasped in front of her, her voice steady despite the trembling I could see in her shoulders. "6 months ago, I made a terrible mistake. I began a relationship with Nathan Reed, the mail carrier for Route 47. During that relationship, I gave him information about your delivery schedules and living situations. I didn't know what he was planning to do with that information, but that doesn't excuse what I did." A murmur rippled through the crowd. I saw Mrs. Nakamura's face harden, saw Mr. Fontaine lean forward in his chair, his jaw tight with anger. "I betrayed my husband, my employer, and all of you," Brooke continued. "I helped a criminal target the most vulnerable people in our community, and because of my actions, many of you suffered real harm. I can never fully make up for that, but I want you to know that I am cooperating fully with the investigation, and I will do whatever it takes to help bring Nathan Reed to justice." She paused, taking a shaky breath. "I'm sorry. I know that's not enough, but it's all I have." The silence stretched. Then Mrs. Nakamura stood up, her small frame supported by a wooden cane, her eyes fixed on Brooke. "I couldn't buy my insulin for 3 weeks," she said, her voice surprisingly strong. "Do you know what happens to a diabetic who can't get insulin? Do you have any idea what that feels like?" "No, ma'am, I don't. I thought I was going to die. I thought my body was going to shut down because some man decided my money was worth more than my life." Mrs. Nakamura's eyes glistened. "And you helped him?" Brooke nodded, tears streaming down her face. "Yes, I did." "Why?" It was the simplest question, and the hardest to answer. I watched Brooke struggle with it, watched her search for words that could explain the inexplicable. "Because I was selfish," she finally said. "Because I wanted something that wasn't mine, and I didn't care who got hurt in the process. Because I was a coward who couldn't face the consequences of my own choices." Mrs. Nakamura stared at her for a long moment. Then she sat back down, her expression unreadable. "I have a question," Mr. Fontaine called out from the middle of the room. "For Mr. Cooper, not his wife." Yes, sir? You figured all this out because of a letter. A love letter from this Nathan Reed to your wife. Mr. Fontaine's voice was gruff, but not unkind. That must have been a hard thing to find. It was. But instead of just throwing her out, you investigated. You dug into the records, found the pattern, reported it to the inspectors. You could have just walked away. No, sir, I couldn't. Why not? I thought about it before answering. Because my marriage ending is my problem. But 47 people losing their benefit checks, that's a crime. And crimes don't fix themselves just because you want to avoid the paperwork. Mr. Fontaine nodded slowly. My grandson is at Cal State. He wants to go into law enforcement. I'm going to tell him about you. The rest of the meeting was a blur of questions and accusations, explanations and apologies. Carlos talked about the recovery process, how the Postal Service was working with the Social Security Administration to reimburse stolen benefits, how fraud alerts had been placed on all affected accounts, how additional security measures were being implemented to prevent future thefts. By the time it was over, I was exhausted, emotionally drained in a way I hadn't experienced since my father's death. But as the crowd filtered out, something unexpected happened. Mr. Fontaine stopped by my chair, his wife beside him, both of them looking at me with something that wasn't quite forgiveness, but wasn't quite condemnation either. You didn't have to do this, he said. You could have let the Postal Service handle everything quietly, protected your wife, saved your career. I couldn't do that, Mr. Fontaine. Why not? I looked at Brooke, standing alone by the projection screen, her face still wet with tears. Then I looked back at the elderly couple who'd almost lost their home because of what she'd helped enable. Because you deserve to know the truth. And because the truth is the only thing that can make any of this right. Mr. Fontaine nodded slowly. Then he extended his hand, and I shook it. Nathan Reed was arrested 3 weeks later. The operation went down on a Tuesday morning just after 9 a.m. Carlos had tracked Nathan's patterns for days, identifying the exact moment when he would be most vulnerable, alone, away from witnesses, in the middle of intercepting what he thought was an $8,000 disability check from an elderly widow on Oak Avenue. I wasn't there for the actual takedown. Carlos and his team handled that. But I got the call at 6:47 in the morning, just as I was finishing my first cup of coffee. It's done, Carlos said. We picked him up at his apartment with $8,000 in stolen checks and a notebook full of victim information. He's in custody, and he's not getting out. Did he say anything? That's the interesting part. When we knocked on his door, he opened it like he was expecting a package delivery. Big smile, cup of coffee in his hand, the whole innocent act. Then he saw the badges and his face just collapsed, like someone had pulled the plug on whatever was holding him together. Did he resist? Didn't even try, just stood there while we cuffed him staring at the wall. Only thing he said was, "How did you find out?" Carlos chuckled without humor. I told him we had good sources. Didn't mention your name. Probably for the best. He lawyered up immediately after that. Some public defender from Sacramento. The guy looked like he'd rather be anywhere else when he saw the evidence we'd compiled. What happens now? Federal grand jury next month. State charges to follow. The prosecutors are talking about running the cases consecutively, which means Reed is looking at 8 to 10 years minimum. Carlos paused. There's something else you should know. What? When we searched his apartment, we found a map. Detailed street layouts of the Sacramento Postal District, with notes about elderly residents, delivery schedules, route patterns. He'd already started planning his next operation. He was going to do it again. He was going to do it bigger. The Sacramento plan was for at least 100 victims. If you hadn't caught that letter when you did, he would have been gone by Christmas, and we might never have connected him to the thefts. I thought about that, about how close Nathan had come to escaping, about how a single misdirected envelope had brought down an entire criminal operation. about how many more elderly people would have suffered if I'd just thrown that letter away. Lucky break, I said. Luck had nothing to do with it, Travis. You noticed something wrong, and you did something about it. That's not luck. That's integrity. The trial took place in February in a federal courtroom in downtown Fresno. I sat in the gallery with Brooke, watching as the prosecution laid out its case against Nathan Reed. The courtroom was standard government issue: wood paneling, fluorescent lights, the seal of the United States mounted behind the judge's bench. But there was nothing standard about the atmosphere. 47 elderly victims and their families filled the gallery, their faces marked with the kind of grim determination that comes from wanting to see justice done. The evidence was overwhelming. Bank records showing deposits into accounts Nathan had opened under fake names. Surveillance footage from post office lobbies showing him filing fraudulent forwarding requests. Testimony from elderly victims who described in heartbreaking detail how the theft had affected their lives. Mrs. Nakamura was called on the second day. She walked to the witness stand slowly, her cane clicking against the marble floor, and settled into the chair with the careful movements of someone who'd learned not to trust her own body. Mrs. Nakamura, the prosecutor began, can you tell the court what happened when you stopped receiving your disability checks? The first month, I thought it was just a delay. These things happen sometimes. I called the Social Security office and they said the check had been sent. Her voice was soft but steady. The second month, I started to worry. I'd already used my savings to cover my medication costs. By the third month, she paused, collecting herself. By the third month, I had to choose between insulin and food. I chose insulin because without it, I would die. But I went 5 days eating nothing but crackers and water. She looked directly at Nathan, who sat motionless at the defense table. I'm 83 years old. I worked my whole life. I paid into this system for 50 years. And because of that man, I went hungry. The prosecutor let the silence hang before continuing. Can you identify the defendant, Mrs. Nakamura? She pointed at Nathan without hesitation. That's him, Nathan Reed. He used to deliver my mail. He'd wave at me through the window, smile, ask about my grandchildren. Her voice hardened. All while he was stealing from me. And then there was Brooke. She took the stand on the third day of the trial, wearing a gray suit I'd never seen before, her hair pulled back, her face pale but composed. The prosecutor walked her through her relationship with Nathan, the information she'd shared, the moment she realized what he'd been doing with it. Mrs. Cooper, did you know Nathan Reed was stealing from the elderly residents on his route? Not at first. He told me he was trying to help them. And when did you learn the truth? When my husband showed me the evidence he'd collected. When I saw the scope of what Nathan had done. Brooke's voice cracked. When I understood that I'd helped him hurt people who couldn't protect themselves. Can you describe the information you provided to the defendant? Brooke took a deep breath. Delivery schedules. Which residents lived alone? Which ones received the largest benefit checks? When they had doctor's appointments or visits from family members? She paused. Nathan told me it was for a community outreach program. He said he wanted to make sure vulnerable seniors had someone checking on them. And you believed that? I wanted to believe it. She looked down at her hands. I was having an affair with him. I was already lying to my husband, to my employer, to myself. Believing one more lie didn't seem like much of a stretch. The prosecutor nodded. Mrs. Cooper, after you learned the truth about Nathan Reed's activities, what did you do? I told my husband everything. I wrote down every piece of information I'd given Nathan, every conversation I could remember. I cooperated with the Postal Inspection Service and the Elder Fraud Unit. She looked up at the jury. I can't undo what I did, but I can make sure Nathan Reed pays for it. The defense attorney's cross-examination was brutal. He painted Brooke as a scorned lover seeking revenge, as an unreliable witness with every reason to lie. He suggested that she'd been an active participant in the theft, that her cooperation was just a ploy to avoid prosecution. Isn't it true, Mrs. Cooper, that you only came forward after your husband discovered the affair? Yes. And isn't it true that you're testifying today because you're hoping for leniency in your own case? I'm testifying because 47 people were hurt by what Nathan did, and I helped make it possible. Brooke's voice was steady. Whatever happens to me, that doesn't change. But you are hoping for leniency, aren't you? I'm hoping for justice, for all of us. The defense attorney tried to shake her story for another 20 minutes, pointing out inconsistencies, questioning her memory, suggesting that her husband had coached her testimony. But Brooke held firm. She admitted to everything she'd done: the affair, the information sharing, the willful blindness to Nathan's true intentions, without trying to minimize or excuse her actions. By the time she stepped down from the stand, even the defense attorney looked tired. The closing arguments came on the fifth day. The prosecutor summarized the evidence: the paper trail, the victim testimony, the damning contents of Nathan's storage unit. He reminded the jury of Mrs. Nakamura's 5 days without food, of the Fontaine's near eviction, of the dozens of elderly citizens who'd suffered because of one man's greed. Nathan Reed didn't just steal money, the prosecutor concluded. He stole peace of mind. He stole trust. He stole the fundamental belief that the people who handle our mail, who come to our homes every day, are there to help us, not exploit us. He took advantage of the most vulnerable members of our community, and he did it systematically, deliberately, without an ounce of remorse. The defense attorney gave his closing, emphasizing reasonable doubt, attacking Brooke's credibility, suggesting that Nathan had merely made some poor choices rather than orchestrating a criminal enterprise. It sounded hollow even to me. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours. Guilty on all counts. Nathan Reed stood motionless as the verdict was read, his face a mask of nothing. I watched him for some sign of remorse, some acknowledgement of the damage he'd caused. There was none. He was simply a man who'd been caught, nothing more. The sentencing came 2 months later. 8 years federal prison, followed by 5 years supervised release. Restitution of $89,000 to his victims. Lifetime ban from employment with the Postal Service or any government agency. As the marshals led him from the courtroom, Nathan looked over his shoulder, directly at me. "This isn't over," he mouthed. I held his gaze until the doors closed behind him. Then I turned to Brooke, who was sitting beside me with tears running down her cheeks. "It's over," I told her. For him, at least. The divorce was finalized in May. I won't pretend it was amicable. There were arguments about the house, about our retirement accounts, about who had wronged whom, and how much that wronging was worth in dollars and cents. But compared to what some of my friends had gone through, the bitter custody battles, the scorched earth tactics, the years of litigation, ours was almost civilized. We met at my lawyer's office on a rainy Wednesday afternoon to sign the final papers. Brooke looked different. Thinner, more tired, like the past 6 months had aged her in ways that went beyond gray hair and wrinkles. "You ready for this?" my lawyer asked, sliding the documents across the table. "Does anyone ever really feel ready?" She gave a small smile. "No, but they do it anyway." I signed where she pointed. Name, date, initials, page after page of legal language that reduced 17 years of marriage to property divisions and asset allocations. When it was done, Brooke and I walked out together, standing under the building's awning while rain drummed against the concrete. "I got a job offer," she said. "Customer service position at a call center in Modesto. Nothing fancy, but it's honest work." "That's good, Brooke. I'm glad." "The probation officer says I can start once the background check clears." She pulled her jacket tighter around herself. 8 months of community service at the senior center. Ironic, isn't it? Maybe, Or maybe it's exactly what you need. She was quiet for a moment. Then, do you hate me, Travis? It was the question I'd been asking myself for months. Did I hate the woman I'd spent 17 years building a life with? The mother of my children? The person who'd shared my bed and my dreams and my hopes for the future? I don't hate you, I said finally. I'm angry. I'm hurt. I'm struggling to understand how someone I thought I knew could do what you did. But hate? I shook my head. Hate takes too much energy, and I've got better things to do with mine. She nodded slowly, accepting the truth of it. Then she turned and walked away into the rain, and I watched her go. Brooke got the house. I got the retirement accounts. We split everything else down the middle and went our separate ways. Her sentence was lighter than I'd expected. 8 months probation, 1,000 hours of community service, permanent removal from any position involving sensitive postal information. The prosecutors had argued for leniency, citing her cooperation and her testimony at trial. The judge had agreed. The last time I saw her as my wife, she was standing in the driveway of the house we'd shared for 15 years, watching me load boxes into a rental truck. The rain had stopped, but the sky was still gray, heavy with clouds that promised more to come. Travis? I stopped, a cardboard box full of books in my arms. Yeah? I'm sorry. She wiped her eyes. Not just for Nathan, for everything. For taking what we had and throwing it away. I know you are. Does that matter? I thought about it, really thought about it, before answering. It matters that you helped catch him. It matters that you stood up in front of those people and took responsibility. It matters that 47 senior citizens got their money back because you did the right thing when it counted. But it doesn't change what I did? No, I agreed. It doesn't. She nodded, accepting the truth of it. Then she turned and walked back into the house, and I climbed into the truck and drove away. 6 months after the trial, I was promoted to District Security Coordinator for the Central Valley Postal Division. It wasn't the career path I'd imagined for myself. I'd always assumed I'd spend my working life in the sorting center, managing the endless flow of letters and packages that kept our communities connected. But the investigation had revealed an aptitude I hadn't known I possessed, an ability to see patterns where others saw chaos, to connect dots that others didn't even know existed. My new office was on the 3rd floor of the Fresno Distribution Center, with a window overlooking the loading docks and a whiteboard covered in case numbers and investigation timelines. My job was to coordinate mail fraud prevention across 6 counties, working with postal inspectors, local law enforcement, and federal agencies to protect the people who depended on the mail for their livelihoods. It was good work, important work, the kind of work that let me sleep at night. One of my first initiatives was an elderly mail protection program, a series of seminars and workshops designed to help senior citizens recognize mail fraud, protect their personal information, and report suspicious activity. I partnered with senior centers across the district, training volunteers, distributing informational materials, developing a hotline for reporting concerns. The program was popular. Within 3 months, we'd enrolled over 2,000 participants and prevented an estimated $40,000 in fraudulent activity. The Postal Service featured it in their national newsletter. The local news ran a segment. Carlos called to congratulate me. "You're making a real difference out there," he said. "More than you know." "I'm trying." That's all any of us can do, Travis. Try to leave things better than we found them. It was at one of those seminars, a Tuesday afternoon session at the Madison Avenue Senior Center, that I met Hannah Phillips. She was standing by the refreshment table, pouring coffee into a paper cup, when I walked in to set up my presentation materials. Tall, dark-haired, with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense manner that reminded me of Carlos. She wore a lanyard identifying her as a social worker with the County Elder Services Division. "You're Travis Cooper," she said. It wasn't a question. "That's me." I've heard about your program. My clients speak highly of it. She took a sip of her coffee, studying me over the rim. Mrs. Nakamura says you saved her life. Mrs. Nakamura is being generous. All I did was catch a criminal. She doesn't see it that way. Hannah set down her cup. She says you're the first postal employee who ever took the time to explain how the system works, who treated her like a person instead of an address. I didn't know what to say to that, so I just nodded. I'm Hannah, by the way. Hannah Phillips. I work with vulnerable adults in the district, seniors, disabled individuals, anyone who might be at risk of exploitation. She extended her hand, and I shook it. Her grip was firm, confident. I'd like to talk to you about expanding your program. I think we could help each other. What did you have in mind? I have a caseload of about 300 clients, all of them potential targets for mail fraud. Every month, at least a dozen of them report suspicious activity, letters asking for personal information, checks that never arrive, notifications about accounts they never opened. Most of them don't know who to call or what to do about it. And you think my program could help? I think a partnership could help. Your postal expertise combined with my client relationships, training sessions, awareness campaigns, maybe a dedicated hotline for reporting concerns. She picked up her coffee again. What do you say? That first conversation lasted 20 minutes. The second, a week later at her office, lasted 2 hours. By the end of the month, we'd developed a joint initiative, a collaboration between the Postal Service and Elder Services to identify and protect at-risk individuals before they could be victimized. The work was good. The partnership was even better. Hannah was sharp, dedicated, and completely uninterested in the kind of bureaucratic nonsense that usually slowed these things down. When she saw a problem, she fixed it. When she made a promise, she kept it. And when she disagreed with me, which happened more often than I'd expected, she said so directly, without games or manipulation. I'm not going to pretend it was love at first sight. After what I'd been through with Brooke, I wasn't sure I believed in love at first sight anymore. But there was something about Hannah, her dedication, her competence, her refusal to accept excuses, that made me want to know more. We started having coffee after our planning meetings, then lunch, then dinner at a Thai place on the edge of downtown, where we talked for 3 hours about our work, our families, our failures, and our hopes. My ex-husband said I cared more about my clients than I did about him, Hannah told me over pad Thai. He wasn't wrong. I've never been good at leaving work at the office. My ex-wife had an affair with a mail carrier who stole $89,000 from senior citizens. Hannah nearly choked on her noodles. That was your wife? That was my wife. I heard about that case. Everyone in Elder Services did. She set down her fork, her expression shifting from surprise to something softer. I'm sorry, Travis. That must have been awful. It was. I took a sip of my water. But it led me here, doing this work, meeting you. So maybe something good came out of it after all. She smiled. The first real smile I'd seen from her, the kind that reached her eyes. That's a very optimistic way of looking at it. I'm trying something new. The call came on a Thursday evening, just as I was leaving the office. Mr. Cooper, this is Detective Reyes with the Fresno Police Department. I'm sorry to inform you that Nathan Reed was released from federal custody this morning. My hand tightened on my phone. Released? He got 8 years. He served 4 with good behavior and was transferred to a halfway house in Oakland. The detective's voice was professionally neutral. Given the nature of his crimes and his statements at trial, we wanted to make sure you were aware. This isn't over, Nathan had mouthed as the marshals led him away. I'd tried to convince myself it was just bravado, the empty threat of a beaten man. But here he was, 4 years later, walking free. Is there any indication he's planning to come back to Fresno? Not at this time. His parole conditions require him to stay in the Bay Area for the first 6 months. but given your involvement in his conviction, we thought you should know." I thanked the detective and hung up. Then I sat in my car for a long time, staring at the loading docks through my windshield, thinking about what Nathan Reed might do with his freedom. The call to Hannah was instinctive. We'd been together for almost a year by then, not living together yet, but close enough that her voice was the first I wanted to hear. "He's out," I told her. She didn't ask who. "Where is he?" "Oakland, halfway house." "Are you okay?" Was I? I'd spent 4 years building a life after Brooke, after Nathan, after everything that had happened. I'd found work that mattered, a partner who understood me, a community that respected what I'd done. And now, the man who tried to destroy it all was walking free. "I don't know," I admitted, "but I will be. Come over tonight. I'll make dinner. We can talk about it." "You don't have to. Travis," her voice was firm, "come over." Hannah's apartment was small but comfortable, filled with books and houseplants and framed photographs of her nieces and nephews. I sat on her couch with a glass of wine I wasn't drinking, watching her move around the kitchen, trying to organize my thoughts. "The parole conditions are strict," I said. "He can't leave Oakland without permission. He can't have contact with any of his victims. He can't work anywhere that handles mail or financial documents." "But you're worried anyway." "He blamed me, Hannah. At the trial, in his statements, in everything. He said I'd destroyed his life because I couldn't handle the truth about my marriage." "That's ridiculous. You caught him stealing from elderly people." "I know that. You know that. But in Nathan's head, he was just taking advantage of a system that had taken advantage of him. He saw himself as the victim, and me as the villain who'd put him in prison." Hannah came over to the couch and sat down beside me. "What do you want to do?" "I want to pretend it doesn't matter. I want to go back to my life and my work and not think about Nathan Reed ever again." I set down my untouched wine. "But I can't do that, can I? I can't just assume he's moved on. Not with what I know about him." "So what's the alternative?" I thought about it. Really thought about it. For the first time since the detective's call. "I build better systems," I finally said. "I make sure every senior center in my district knows about him. I coordinate with parole officers and law enforcement. I create a network that will catch him the moment he tries anything." I looked at Hannah. "I keep doing my job, only harder." She nodded slowly. "That sounds like a plan. It's all I've got. It's more than most people would do." She reached over and took my hand. "You know that, right? Most people would just lock their doors and hope for the best. You're trying to protect everyone. It's what I do." "I know." She squeezed my hand. "It's one of the things I love about you." It was the first time either of us had used that word. I looked at her. This woman who'd walked into my life at a senior center coffee table and refused to leave, and felt something I hadn't felt in years. Hope. "I love you too," I said. She smiled. "I know." 2 years later, I was standing in the community room of the Madison Avenue Senior Center, watching as Mrs. Nakamura received the district's first Vigilant Citizen Award. The ceremony was small, just a few dozen people, mostly seniors from the protection program and their families, but the recognition was genuine. Mrs. Nakamura had reported 3 attempted mail scams in the past year, preventing an estimated $12,000 in fraud and leading to the arrest of 2 identity thieves. "I learned from Mr. Cooper," she said, accepting her certificate with trembling hands. "He taught us how to see the patterns, how to protect ourselves and each other." I stood in the back of the room with Hannah on one side and Carlos on the other, watching an 83-year-old diabetic woman take a bow. "You did good, Travis," Carlos said quietly. "Real good." "We did good," I corrected him. "All of us." The reception afterward was informal. Coffee and cookies, conversations, and laughter. I made the rounds, shaking hands, answering questions, listening to the stories of people who'd found community and purpose in our protection program. Near the end of the evening, Mrs. Nakamura approached me. She looked smaller than I remembered, more fragile, but her eyes were as sharp as ever. "Mr. Cooper, may I speak with you privately?" "Of course." We stepped out into the hallway, away from the noise of the reception. Mrs. Nakamura leaned on her cane, studying me with an expression I couldn't quite read. "I heard about your ex-wife," she said, "that she moved to Portland, that she's working with an organization that helps fraud victims." I nodded. Brooke and I didn't talk often. A few emails, the occasional phone call around the holidays. But I'd heard the same thing. She'd taken her community service requirement and turned it into a career, channeling her guilt into something productive. Do you forgive her? It was the question everyone wanted to ask, but no one had the courage to voice. I'd been expecting it for years. "I don't know if forgiveness is the right word," I said slowly. "I've accepted what happened. I've moved on from it. But forgiveness?" I shook my head. "She helped someone steal from people like you, Mrs. Nakamura. People who trusted her. I'm not sure that's something that can be forgiven." "Perhaps not." Mrs. Nakamura's eyes were thoughtful. "But she also helped catch him. She stood up in front of all of us and admitted what she'd done. That takes courage." "It does. And she's spending her life trying to make amends. Isn't that what forgiveness is supposed to enable?" I didn't have an answer for that. Maybe I never would. Mrs. Nakamura reached out and patted my arm. "You're a good man, Mr. Cooper. A good man with a good heart. Don't let the past take that away from you." Then she turned and walked back into the reception, leaving me alone in the hallway with questions I couldn't answer and a future I couldn't predict. Hannah was waiting for me in the parking lot, leaning against my car, her breath visible in the cold evening air. "How'd it go with Mrs. Nakamura?" She asked if I'd forgiven Brooke. "What did you tell her?" I walked over and stood beside her, looking up at the stars scattered across the California sky. I told her I didn't know. "Is that true?" "I don't know that either." I turned to face her. "But I know I'm grateful for where I am now, for the work I do, the people I help, you. That's a good place to start." "Yeah." I reached for her hand. "It is." We drove home together, through streets I'd known my entire life, past houses where mail carriers delivered letters and packages to people who trusted them to do their jobs. The system wasn't perfect, it never would be, but it was better than it had been. More protected. More aware. That was my legacy. Not the betrayal that had launched it, but the protection it had created. Not the crime that had been committed, but the crimes that had been prevented. Mrs. Nakamura was right about one thing. The past could destroy you if you let it. Or it could drive you to build something better. I chose to build. The letter arrived on a Tuesday, exactly 5 years after the first one. I was sorting through the morning mail at my new house, the one Hannah and I had bought together 6 months earlier, when I saw the cream-colored envelope, the blue ink, the familiar handwriting. My heart stopped. But when I turned it over, the return address was different. A street in Portland. A name I recognized. Brooke Cooper. I opened it slowly, half expecting another confession, another revelation that would upend my life. Instead, I found a single page, handwritten, dated 3 days earlier. Travis. I know I have no right to write to you. I know that whatever good I've done since the trial doesn't erase what I did before it. But I wanted you to know that I think about you every day. Not with regret, though there's plenty of that, but with gratitude. You could have destroyed me. You had every reason to. Instead, you gave me a chance to make things right. You protected me when you didn't have to, and you believed in me when no one else did. I'm not asking for your forgiveness. I'm not even asking for your friendship. I just wanted to say thank you for being the kind of man who does the right thing even when it hurts, for showing me that redemption is possible, even for people who don't deserve it. Be happy, Travis. You've earned it. Brooke. I read the letter twice. Then I folded it carefully, slipped it back into its envelope, and set it on the kitchen counter. Hannah came downstairs a few minutes later, her hair still wet from the shower. She saw the envelope and raised an eyebrow. Everything okay? Yeah, I smiled at her. Everything's okay. She poured herself a cup of coffee and sat down across from me. Want to talk about it? Maybe later. I reached across the table and took her hand. Right now, I just want to enjoy the morning. Outside, the sun was rising over Fresno, casting long shadows across the streets and sidewalks where mail carriers were beginning their routes. Somewhere in the city, an elderly woman was checking her mailbox, secure in the knowledge that her benefits would arrive safely. Somewhere else, a postal inspector was reviewing a fraud report, building a case against another predator who thought they could steal from the vulnerable. The system was working. Not perfectly, never perfectly, but well enough. I finished my coffee, kissed Hannah goodbye, and drove to work. There was mail to protect, and I was the man to protect it.